Hey guys, how are you doing? In this small video series, we are building something very interesting. We are building a full stack daily calorie tracking application. So we are using React and Bootstrap for frontend. We are using Golang and Gin for backend, and we are using MongoDB for our database. And let me give you a quick demo of the whole application. Then we'll do some visual planning and then we'll get started. So like I said, it's a small video series. It'll be about 4 or 5 videos. And the main thing is that for React, we'll be using functional components only, because the other two full stack Golang and React projects that we've built in the past, the Golang and React chat application and the Golang and React to-do application, for both of those projects, I was using class-based components in the front end. And a lot of you told me that you don't like using class-based components and I should be using only functional components. And this is why from this project onwards, we'll only be using functional components. So I hope you like that. And I still feel that you should know class-based components before you work with functional components in React. All right. So since I have those two projects and you can learn from those now, since from now onwards, we can use functional components. I don't have any issues with that. So let's go through this demo quickly. So here what you can do is you have a button, track today's calories. You click on it. You can enter the dish. So let's say it is a burger, or more specifically, it's a veggie burger. And ingredients are cauliflower, you have broccoli, and you have cheese, for example. Calories, 450, and fat is, let's say, just 3 grams or something like that. And it's a very good CRUD application. So you can see when you add this entry, you can see your veggie burger now with calories and fat. You can delete any entry that you want. You can change the ingredients later on if you wanted to. So let's change the ingredients of the almond biscotti. You can instead say there are cashews in your almond biscotti, change it. And your almond biscotti, the ingredients get changed completely. You can change the entire entry itself. You don't just have to change the ingredients. You can change the dish. You can say it's not almond biscotti, it's actually almond brittle that I ate. And ingredients were almonds and refined sugar and honey. I'm just writing anything that comes to my mind. Calories 300, fat is 2. So here you can see it changed from almond biscotti to almond brittle now, and all the ingredients have also changed. So you can change the entry, change the ingredients, delete the entry. You can add new entries. So it's awesome, right? So we have we have to work with these extra pop-ups that we have. So we have one extra pop-up, one more extra pop-up here, changing order, and this pop-up here. So 3 pop-ups, 1 screen. And as you can see, I'm just using Bootstrap. The standard Bootstrap buttons that you get, standard Bootstrap stuff that you get out here. Nothing fancy, no additional CSS, to keep it light, to keep it very simple, and to focus on the most important technologies. We want to focus on React, we want to focus on Golang, we don't want any extra fluff. All right, so how are we going to do it? We are going to be using React and Bootstrap for our front end, like I said. So the React application sends requests to Gin, our Gin router, which is basically Golang. And from Golang, you have your validator v10 being used, which then sends, which basically is, checks for validation, and then you sends requests using your Mongo driver to MongoDB. And this is how you the whole flow works. Now, this is from a tech stack level, and now we'll go one step deeper. This is like a 10,000 feet perspective. We know what's happening here, but we want to go a step deeper in our planning. We want to understand how it's going to work from a functional level. Okay. Now, this is something that I always recommend if you're starting out with Golang, or even if you are a very experienced developer. Or if you're a very experienced developer, you already do this. You already do a lot of visual planning, and I don't have to tell you this. But if you're a beginner developer, you want to start thinking like a very senior developer, somebody who has more than 8 to 10 years of experience. You want to start thinking of things visually first. You want to start breaking things down to very small bits. Then you want to see how they work together and where all problems can exist, and what all use cases or test cases even you want to think about, or use cases mostly in our case. And then you want to start writing the code, right? Do all the planning beforehand, before you write any code, as much as possible. Right, so it's a small project, so I'll do very basic planning. If it was a much bigger project, I would have spent days. Sometimes I spend days just planning everything out in excruciating details before I even write one single line of code. Okay, and that ensures that I don't enter into a lot of issues and problems and all of that. All right, so let's do some basic planning. In our backend, we'll be having a models folder, a routes folder, and the main.go file. The models folder will have just one file called the entry.go file. It won't have much, it'll just have the struct of the entry that we'll create. So every single value that we're creating, or every single data point that we're creating, that's an entry where you enter the name of the dish and the calories and ingredients. So that's one entry. So we'll have the struct for that in this file. That is it, nothing else. In a routes folder, we have two files. One is the connection.go file, which is just going to have some logic for connecting with the database. And entries.go file is going to be an important file because we'll have these 6 functions and maybe possibly more functions where we'll be adding a new entry, getting the rest of entries to show there, to display there, getting each entry by ID when we want to change it. And then you have your update entry if you want to update any entry, and then delete any entry, and then update the ingredients. So I showed you that button. You can update the ingredients of a particular entry. You can do that out here. Main.go file will just have all the list of all the routes, and then we'll be basically sending all the requests to the particular functions, the relevant functions in the entries.go file. So this is our plan. This is our at least file level and function level plan. Basic level planning has been done. And in the next video, we'll get started with writing the actual code. So what we'll be doing is we'll be building the backend first. We'll be building the server side first. And the front end is going to be very straightforward and simple. Just a couple of components, and like you saw, just about 2-3 pop-ups, one screen, that is it. And we're using just really basic bootstrap with React. Open up your terminal and we'll say mkdir go calorie go and React calorie tracker. And I'll just add YT just to show that, just for my reference, it's a YouTube project that I'm building with you guys. So I will go into this directory and I will create 2 folders here. One will be server and the other will be front end. And I will now cd into the server folder and I'll go mod init. So in case any of you is from Node.js background and you're trying to do this project with me for the first time, a Golang project with me for the first time, then go mod init basically is like npm init. You initialize your Golang project. And the methodology or the code that we'll be following here, that we'll be writing here, will be very similar to what we've already written with our Golang authentication project, our e-commerce project, the Golang engine e-commerce project, and the restaurant management project. So the code is going to look very similar to that. So if you've done those projects, it's going to be a breeze for you and you can skip through it very quickly. You don't have to worry about a lot about the backend. But in case you're doing it for the first time, then I suggest you stick around with me. You follow every single line of code and you actually build it along with me. Okay. So again, I'll repeat, if you've done this before with me in the e-commerce project, the restaurant management project, and Go authentication project, we're going to be using almost a similar looking code base. If you've not, so if you've done that, then it's very easy for you. You can skip the whole backend part, right? So the first 2-3 videos will be backend, then we'll be building the front end. You can skip the backend part completely. I think just probably, speed up a lot. And if you're doing it for the first time, I suggest you build it with me from scratch. All right. So here we'll say go mod init, and I'll just say Akhil / and the name of the project is Go React Calorie Tracker YT. Now you don't have to write Akhil github.com/Akhil. You can just say this as the name of the entire project. That'll work just fine. I usually do this because this is the best practice. Because actually, where this has come from, let me explain to you. So whenever you launch a Golang project, you're launching it as a Golang package. So anybody can go get this entire package and they can start using it, start interacting with your project. So this is how you launch Golang projects into GitHub or to the world. Basically, you launch them as packages. So with npm, you get the npm website, npm.js website, from where you can install these packages very easily. The npm tool, the CLI tool. But with Golang, you don't have anything like that. So with Golang, you have to launch whatever you write, whatever package you write on the github.com itself, ideally, if you want the world to use it. And the way they will install it is they'll say go get, and then they'll write the name of this entire project. So this is why I say this, because I know eventually I will push this to GitHub. And even though this project is not going to be structured as a package that can be used as a package, it will be something that you will clone probably and then run it as your own. But maybe if I was creating a package, then this would be the right way to follow, and that's why it's the best practice. Anyhow, so we'll initialize this, and when you initialize this, it creates a new go.mod file, which is like your package.json file if you're coming from a Node.js background, and your toml file if you're coming from a Rust background. I teach Rust, by the way, on YouTube. In case you haven't checked it out, do check it out. Anyhow, so now that we have our project initialized, I'll go ahead and open this up in my VS Code. You can do that as well, VS Code. The only difference between my VS Code and your VS Code would be that I'm on something called as WSL. So if you see this, it says WSL Ubuntu. Even though I'm using Windows, I use something called as Ubuntu on top of Windows, and WSL enables me to have multiple instances of Ubuntu. So I can have 16, 18, 20, 22.04, all of these versions running at the same time on my Windows machine. So this is a pretty cool feature, WSL. If you don't know about it, do check it out. So this is my VS Code. I have installed the top extensions. So whenever you go to extensions and you write Golang, the 3-4 extensions that come on top, just install them. You'll be good to go. The only extra thing that I have is tab 9, which helps me to autocomplete code sometimes. But even if you don't have these, completely all right. By the way, if you don't use extensions, that's a really good thing, and I always recommend not using extensions if you're training to be a competitive programmer, or if you're training to apply to really solid engineering companies. Don't rely on extensions, because when you interview with them, you won't get access to your favorite code editor and those extensions. So if you become dependent on them, it'll be a big problem for you. Anyhow, so this is why in my initial videos I never use extensions. Now I start using them because a lot of people who watch my videos, they said, hey, just show us extensions. It just makes the viewing experience easier. So that's why I'm doing it. I don't recommend using extensions. All right. So here we have main.go file, which is the most important file ideally in a Golang project. And then you'll have your models folder where we'll create the models. Then we'll have our routes folder. And that is about it. In our routes folder, we'll have a entries.go file. And we will have a connection.go file. On the connection.go file, we will be connecting with our database, which is going to be MongoDB. In our entries.go file, we'll have all the routes listed and the handler functions listed. In the main.go file itself, we'll have the routes listed actually. And in the models file, I'll have my entry.go, which will basically be a struct. So that's it. It's going to be just a struct. So I'll say package models. It's going to be package models. I'm going to be importing something. What I'm going to be importing is go.mongodb.org. Now we'll be using MongoDB, like I said. So MongoDB gives me access to MongoDriver. MongoDriver is an ORM. Your Golang is not able to talk directly with your MongoDB, so you need a MongoDriver to be able to connect them and to be able to for them to able to talk to each other. And I need my bson primitive. Okay. And the reason I need bson is because I need to work with IDs. You'll see in a minute. So every single entry that I'm creating for, let's say, my journal entry or my calorie entry, I'm calling it as an entry just to keep things very simple, right? So I'm tracking calories, but every dish that I'm inputting will be basically an entry. So my breakfast will be an entry, my snacks will be an entry, my lunch will be an entry, and so on. And each entry will have dish, calories, and fat, and whatever I want to have. So I'll keep it very simple. You can add as many things you want. I'm just going to keep ID here. I'm going to keep dish. Then I'm going to have how much fat that that dish had, and then I'm going to have what were the ingredients, and then I'll have the calories, and that's about it. You can add many more things like the MSG content, sodium content, blah 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 blah. The scope is unlimited. So you'll say object ID and bson ID. Okay, this is why I need the bson package. And then for dish, you'll say dish is going to be JSON dish. Now, a lot of you ask me in the comments, and I don't know why, that why am I using star here? That's because obviously I'll have to pass a reference because dish is what I'm passing to the to Golang, and ID is going to be created by Golang, so I don't need to pass a star here. So I get this question a lot. Funny, I don't know. It's really funny why I get this question all the time. But here is the answer. Okay, so float 64. You have fat as float 64. You can have it as int also, not a problem. Keep it as float. And in JSON, it's going to look like this, fat. So for each of these values, right, this is how Golang understands them to be. So struct, in case you're very new to Golang, struct is basically your own data type that you create. And struct is usually a combination of multiple data types. So like, let's say there are some data types like float and string that Golang already understands. And then we have primitive.objectID, which Golang doesn't understand, but with the help of this package, Golang is now able to understand with the help of primitive. Similarly, ingredients will be string, and calories will be string as well. So these are some things that Golang understands. Now, Golang says that you can create your own structs. So it gives you the ability to create your own structs or own data types, which are a combination of multiple data types that Golang already understands. So in collection, when Golang sees this, that, okay, you have created a new struct which has a string, a float, a string, a string. So it knows, okay, what you're trying to do. It's able to understand that. Now, when you work with Postman, or when we send this data using, let's say, the curl command, or with Postman, we're going to be sending it in JSON format. Even our MongoDB understands JSON. Golang does not understand JSON. Now, this is another question that I get a lot, big confusion, that why doesn't JSON understand, why doesn't Golang understand JSON? That's because JSON is JavaScript object notation. So people coming from a JavaScript background, they assume that all of the languages understand JSON and are able to work with JSON right out of the box. That's not true. No other language is able to work with JSON right out of the box. So you have to do a little bit of tinkering here and there, just like with Rust. I've shown you how to do that with work with JSON. I've shown you so many times how to work with JSON with Golang. So what you're doing here is that Golang is kind of smart. So you tell it that, hey, JSON, and JSON, the value looks like this. So it looks like ingredients with a small I. It looks like fat with a small f, dish with a small d. Whereas for Golang, the values are dish with a capital D, fat with a capital F, ingredients with a capital F, I. So whenever we now convert the data, sorry, I'm so used to not using extension that I was actually manually pressing my space bar to format this, but it now formats automatically on Control S. That's one benefit that you get with using extensions, that I agree. I earlier had to use GoFMT at the end of every program just to format it out. All right. Anyhow, so I agree, there is a benefit of using extensions. Okay, so with calories, I'm going to say JSON calories. So when we work with the JSON data that comes to Golang and we tell it to decipher it using struct, I'm saying decipher, but the actual word is marshalling or unmarshalling, and then there's another word, I'm forgetting it. But yeah, marshalling and unmarshalling is the process of converting from JSON into structs, and from structs into JSON. So that happens very easily with Golang, because you have all of these. You've told Golang that, hey, in JSON it looks like this, whereas for you it's going to look like this. All right. This process that we're doing is very similar in Rust as well. I've already shown it, I think, in one of the videos on my channel. In case you're interested in Rust, do check it out. It's an awesome long language, and if you learn it with Golang, it's very easy to learn, because Golang is very similar to Rust. That's how so whenever I teach Rust, I treat it from a perspective that you already know Golang, or you might be learning Golang. So then I show the comparisons, and what you see is that Golang and Rust are very, very similar. In many ways. Sorry. Okay, so that was our entry.go. Okay, entry is basically what we'll be creating in the database. It's our model, and now we'll work on our main.go file. Main.go file basically is package main, and it's going to have some imports. Now that I have this package here, what I can do is I can say go mod tidy, and it will then go ahead and search this package and actually import it. Go mod tidy also checks for go.sum file in your project. If it doesn't exist, it will create that file for you. All right, so going back to main.go file, while it does its thing, the command that I just entered in the terminal, while it does its thing, let's do some of our stuff that we want to do. So we have func main, which is where the program enters into a Golang program. Func main is the most important function, and the port for running the program. Now you could have your environment file, and you could read that environment file and get the environment for port variable. But if you don't have it, which will be what I'll be doing, I won't have any port variable because I won't be creating an environment file, because anyways I can't upload that environment file in GitHub, right? I have to put in git ignore. So it's your job. If you want to do that, if you can create an environment file, and I've kept that option here for you to read from environment file. Otherwise you can just say port as 8000 if you don't want the complexity added. Anyhow, then you want to have router will be gin.new. So this is why I said it's going to be very similar to the authentication project that we did, and Go restaurant management project, and the Go e-commerce project, because we're using gin basically. I hope when I save now, it's able to get gin for me. Yes, it was able to get gin for me. Awesome. Okay, so now this router, for our program to work properly, we need to be using the logger. You've probably already seen me use the logger. It looks really nice when we use the logger. It shows you which API was called. So it looks really good in the terminal. It also helps you to find out errors, because you know exactly which API led to the errors. So I always use logger. This is like a middleware that whenever you say use, not user use. So this format is very similar to what we do in Express. If you're from a Node.js background, this is what we do in Express as well. We use for using middlewares. Okay. And I'll also use course default. And now we can start creating our routes. So I'm going to have my post route, capital post /entry/create. So whenever I want to create a new entry, this is how it happens. Now I'll have this routes package here, right? So I'm in my main go file. In my routes package, I'll have the functions that will actually handle these routes. So the handler functions will be in these files, in the entries.go file to be exact. So here I'll say add entry, but I'm saying routes dot. Now when I want to get that, I'll say here package routes, and here when I save it, it did get me course, which seems okay, but it wasn't able to ascertain or understand that there is a routes package also that I have. And to do that, I'll basically manually get it, because from my go.mod file, what I'll do is I'll copy the name of the project, copy it here, and I will say /routes. So whenever you want to import a package, your own packages, let's say, at least in Golang, in a Golang project, this is how you do it. So if my project was initialized without github.com/akhil, I could have just written this, and then I could have accessed my routes. But now, since I have said that my project is called this, I'll have to write the whole thing and then /routes. Okay, and this is how you basically import a package. Could be an external package, could be an internal package in your own project. You can easily import them like this, with using the absolute route. You always use absolute route, not relative routes. Okay, so you have routes.addEntry, and then you want to have router.get So I've written it twice because I want all entries and then I want entry by ID. So I'll say /entries, and here I'll say /entry by ID /. Actually, I need one more get, and you'll come to know why I'm using it. ingredient. If you saw there, I was able to change the actual ingredient, that one ingredient for my entries. So this is why those routes are the ingredient routes will be to read those ingredients and then edit those ingredients, specific ingredients. Okay, so we have all entries, and this is going to be handled by my function called get entries. Now you'll get these red squiggly lines out here because we don't have those functions set up, but when we'll create them, all these lines should go away, and we'll have get entry by ID. And ingredient slash ingredient, here we'll say routes dot get entries by ingredient. And now we'll work on our put and delete routes. So we'll say router dot put, there will be 2 update routes and there will be 1 delete route. So like I said, there's something to do with ingredients where we can change that particular ingredient in that dish, or we can change the entire dish itself, all the entries. So we'll say entry slash update when you want to update the entire entry, or you'll say ingredient. By the way, I forgot to put a slash here. Ingredient slash update slash ID. Okay, so here we'll say routes dot update entry. Here we'll say routes dot update ingredient, and for delete we'll say slash entry slash delete slash ID comma routes dot delete entry. And at the end you want to say router dot run plus port. This runs your server at a particular port which we've defined as to be 8000 if there's no environment file. And this is it. This is all that our main.go file is going to have. We had worked on our main.go file, and now we'll start working on our entries.go file. So connection.go file is going to be very straightforward. It'll be just connecting with the database, MongoDB, and I'll work on it after a while. But now we want to focus on our routes package, which is entries. So both of these files will belong to the routes package. But now we want to work on our entries.go file because this file will have all these functions which are currently giving us a squiggly line. And what I wanted to make sure is you have a 1:1 connection with all these functions. So make sure that all of these functions exist in this file. And the right way to do this is to first create the outlines of these functions. So what I want you to do is you create the outline of all of these functions, and add entry is going to just get gin.context, and obviously you'll have to have an import statement somewhere which will get your gin package, and we'll worry about it in a while. But first we need to create the outline of these functions. So the second function that we want to create the outline for is get entries, which is basically getting all the entries. Again, it gets access to gin.context, and then you have get entries by ingredient function. Somehow my tab 9 is not being very smart at the moment. It's not getting me these functions. All I want are these functions, and I don't know why it's not able to get me these. Okay, so add entry. Why is it's not connected it yet to this function yet? I don't know. Anyhow, get entries by ingredient. Again, I'll have gin.context. Now the benefit with gin, in case you haven't watched any of my series earlier, is that you get access to your params and your request body, all of that through the gin context itself. You don't have to necessarily specifically mention W and H, which are your HTTP writer and your HTTP request and your writers. You don't have to specifically reference them here. which you have to do in the HTTP package, right? By the way, Jin is calling them only those functions only in the like if you look at Jin's code, if you open it up, that's what it's doing. It's essentially making requests to that only, but it's just doing that under the surface, so you get much cleaner code. So the other thing that you wanna get is the get entry by ID. Okay, again, Jin not context. Now see what tab9 is saying, that I should also get my ID here, but what tab9 doesn't know, right, it being AI and all of that, it doesn't know is that Jin gives me access to the ID params automatically, okay, which I can reference from C. I can get access to it from C itself. Okay, so get entry by ID was one more function. Then we have our update ingredient function, and then we'll have our update entry function. So it's a func update entry, and the last function usually is the delete function, so delete entry. Okay, so now that we have the the outline of these functions, I'll just Control S. Even though I've written Jin, it should have been able to get Jin for me, but it didn't. And let me see. Okay, so all of these quick lines have gone away. Only add entry by ID are remaining. And why is that? Add entry looks legit to me. It looks okay. It's the same spelling, right? Same spelling. Yeah, still there's some issue. Entry by ID. Oh, so this entry by ID should have been get entry by ID. So I'll write here get entry by ID. Okay, so only this squiggly line is here for add entry. I don't know why. Anyhow, so it's anyways going to get fixed. So firstly we'll work on our delete entry function, because delete function is the easiest function, right? And then the get all function is the second easiest function. Then you have get entry by ID is the third easiest function, and so on. And like usually update function is complicated. So you want to start with the delete function, and here I'll take a variable called entry ID, which will basically be equal to the params dot ID. So I can refer my C, which is my Jin context, and I can refer params. I can get access to ID. This is the beauty that you get with Jin, because obviously when you want to delete something, you need the ID of that thing that you want to delete, right? So this is why we have this. And then you want to have the primitive package to get object ID from hex, and we'll pass the entry ID to it. And then we'll get that in doc ID, and then that'll make it easier for us to access and work with it. Now we'll say context with timeout. You don't want your program to keep waiting when you're working with the database, so you always want to have a timeout. If you worked with PHP before, you probably know what is timeout. If you worked with Ruby, you probably have worked a lot with timeout. And then you have your we'll have an entry collection. Okay, so entry collection is basically we'll create our entry collection. Right at the top is where we need to create our entry collection. So we'll say entry collection is mongo.collection. Okay, which is equal to open collection client comma calories. So you will get access to calories collection, which is basically going to be called as entry collection, and you'll get access to that from your Mongo. And client is basically your Mongo client. So we'll define all of that in the connection.go package. Don't worry about that right now. Connection.go file, sorry, which is again part of package routes. That's why we're able to access it so easily. We'll create that here in this file. But for now, you need to know that entry collection is basically our collection that enables us to work with the particular collection in the database for MongoDB. Okay, so in the delete entry function, you want to have entry collection dot delete one. So we're just telling MongoDB, hey, MongoDB, you need to use the a particular collection, and then you want to delete that particular value from that collection. And we have access to that value with ID, and the ID here is doc ID, which we just received. Whatever result you get back, you'll store that in a variable called result. And whenever you run a database function like this, you can expect errors, and you would want to ideally handle those errors there itself. So we'll say if error is not equal to nil, that means if there is an error, you want to say http dot status internal server error comma gin.h, and there is an error. So the error that will be there will be error.error, and you will print out the error as well. A lot of people ask me, why do you need FMT to print in Golang? I mean, very new people who are learning Golang, they ask me, why is there no function for printing by default? Why do you have to import a package? That's because Golang is very modular. So only the things that you want in that particular program, you can import them. Otherwise, if you don't need them, don't use those packages. And obviously Golang stops you from using those packages anyways if you're not using those functions. That makes Golang very light and modular, and that's actually one of the benefits that you get with Golang. The binary files that you get after building it are very small, and that contributes to the speed and lightness of Golang. It consumes much less resources. If everything goes well, you want to say everything was okay, status okay, and here I don't know why it just completed it for me. I want to say result dot deleted count. So in my result variable, I'll have a deleted count, and that's what I want to return here. Tab 9 couldn't guess that. So much for it being AI. Okay, so now we'll work with the get all entries function, because like I said, that's the second easiest function. So what you'll do now is you will first create your context. So you'll say context cancel, context comma cancel is equal to context dot with timeout context dot background comma 100 multiplied by time dot second. We'll create a variable called entries. It's a slice. So if you see something like this, like these two brackets here, it is a slice in Golang, and of type this is the type. So it will be collection, basically. It's collection of BSON entries. And then I'm defining a variable called cursor, and this is going to be equal to entry collection that we have defined together just a while back, which helps us to talk to that particular collection in MongoDB, because MongoDB doesn't have tables, it has collections. I hope you know that by now. So what you want to find is everything. You want to find all of the records. And like I said, anytime you run a database collection, database function, you want to handle error. So you'll say if error is not equal to nil, you want to do something there. c.json will be http dot status internal server error comma gin.h, and you will get an error which will be error.error. You want to print line just the error. You want to print out just the error, and you want to return. So now you run the find function. So find is a default function that you get with MongoDB. You run the find function, you get all the values, right? You're passing nothing there, so you'll get all the values back. When you pass like an empty object in find, you get all the values. You know that by now. If you want some specific values, then you pass here that for ID is equal to this, or where not exactly where, but you get the idea, right? When you want something specific, you say find by ID or find one, something like that. But all these values that you get from the database is in a very raw kind of a format, and you want to have it in this entries variable, which is a slice. You want it in a much more consumable format. So how do you do that? You'll say cursor, which is where all of our values are right now. So I'll say cursor dot all. We'll take all the values, pass the context, pass this empty variable right now, which is empty variable right now called entries. And you want to say if error equal to, and then here you will handle the error itself. So you'll say error is not equal to nil, and here you want to say c.json http internal server error, and you'll print out the error. So it's say chin.h, okay, and you will print out the error. Awesome. Just like what you did here. And here again the same thing, actually just copy and paste it, and then you return. All right, and at the end just def or cancel, you wanna print out the entries, and since everything has gone okay, because it's not in none of these if conditions, everything has gone okay, because there's no error, right? So if everything has gone okay, then you want to say status okay, and you want to return the entries from this function. We'll be working on our connection.go file, and we will be working on one of these functions, mostly get entry by ID function. And in the next video, which will be the last video for the backend at least, we'll work on the other remaining 4 functions, and then that will be the end of backend, and then we'll start working on the front end side of things. Okay, so connection.go file, this is going to be of package routes because it's in the routes folder. This is how Golang understands that all the files belong to this folder and they're all of the same package. And then when you want to import that package, you can do that very easily by importing this package called routes, and then you can access functions from this file also and this file also. So it combines all of the functions that you write in these two, or how many ever files you want to write, and you'll be able to access them because of package routes. They'll be in the same package. Okay, so you have import. I'll need a couple of packages, but what I'll do is I'll rely on the intelligence of my extensions to help me find, write those packages for me, import those packages for me. I'll focus on the code. So the first function we need is the db instance function. Okay, and this returns a Mongo client. By the way, the code that I'm writing here is very similar. It's almost the same actually to the connection code we have written for our restaurant management application and our e-commerce management applications, because they had Golang with MongoDB. So in case you just copy and paste from there, it's completely okay, because essentially I'm doing the same. I'm just referring that code right now. So for people who have done those projects with me, you don't need to watch this. You can skip this part. If you're watching it for the first time, then I recommend you follow along. And I'll take a variable called MongoDB, and that variable is actually going to be equal to the MongoDB connection string, which is localhost. On my port, it's running on my computer, is running on port 27017, which is the default port for MongoDB, and then you'll have the database called Calories DB. Okay. Then we'll use the Mongo package to create a new client. Now, I usually manually type the Mongo package here, but let's see if the Golang, one of those extensions, can find it for me. So I saved it. It didn't find it for me. How stupid is that? Anyhow, so here I'll say options dot client dot apply URI, and here we'll send our MongoDB connection string. And Mongo is the package which will have access to all of this. So and also options. So I think I'll have to now get them manually, because my extension didn't get it for me. So I'll say Mongo driver /mongo, and then I'll copy and paste it here. By the way, if you know, like I'm new to extensions, I've never used extensions before because they kind of make you reliant on them. You start depending on them, and then you're screwed because in interviews you don't get access to your favorite code editor. So in case you know why this didn't happen and how I can fix it, in the sense how to make those extensions find these packages, the right packages on their own, please let me know in the comments. Okay, and here whatever the client that it returns, I'll capture that in this variable called client, and if error is not equal to nil, then I'll say log.fatal error, and now hopefully it should get the log package at least for me. So I'll try saving it. Yeah, it was able to get the log package for me. So I think the problem is with the third-party packages sometimes, mostly. Okay, so here then I'll say context cancel is equal to context dot with timeout. Whenever you have these kind of operations with databases, you want to have a timeout because you don't want the program to keep waiting forever. Now you need the context package and the time package, and you get squiggly lines here, ctx client and cancel, because we've not used them yet. If you say defer cancel here, so that red line at least goes away. I'll try saving it. Hopefully it gets the context and time package for me. Yes, it was able to do that. Awesome. Then what I will do is I'll tell my client, which is the client, to connect using context, the context CTX, which has timeout now. And we are already preempting this error out here, so we'll handle it also. And we'll say log.fatal error. And I'll print out connected to MongoDB if everything has gone okay, and I'll return the client because that's what I'm supposed to return from this function. As you can see, I'm supposed to return a MongoDB client. Okay, so whenever you see, by the way, whenever you see a capital C like this, it basically means it's a struct. So somewhere in your Mongo package there is a struct called client, and that's what we're returning here. And we're able to create the client with the help of our connection string, which we passed here to apply URI function for the client. And the main function was mongo.newClient. Mongo is the package. Now when I save it, fmt package should also get imported here. It did. So that client with the capital C is something that belongs to Mongo. So that's why we refer to it as mongo.client. So whenever you refer to a struct from a package, this is how you do it. So if you hover over it, you can see what all the client has. This is awesome, right? Now you want to create your a variable called client. So we'll say client, and this client is the one that gets passed around everywhere. So you see here entry collection, Mongo collection, open collection with client, and with that client you can access your calories collection, and that's the client that we are now going to create, which is of type mongo.client, where mongo.client, as you already know, is the struct called client, is equal to db instance. Okay, db instance obviously being this function that we just created. So with all of this, you will create a open collection function which takes in your client obviously being mongo.client, and it should just return Mongo collection, and it should also take in the name of the collection. So here you're also sending the name of the collection, and this is the open collection function that we are now creating. Okay, now you'll realize that this needs to have a capital O to be able to call the function that we're creating right now, because this has a capital O and capital C. Okay, define a variable called collection, type is Mongo collection, and just the standard MongoDB stuff where we say that in that database, help us with the database called Calories DB, and in that database, help us with this collection name, which is coming to this function, which we are accepting in this function. And this function doesn't do much, it just returns that collection. So with this, our function is done, our connection file is done, and now we want to start worrying about our entries.go file, where we have quite a few functions pending, about 5 functions pending. And in this video, we'll just work on this function. In the next video, we'll close the other 4, and then we'll be done with the backend at least. So navigate to your entries.go file, close all the other files if you want to, and come to this function called getEntryById. In this function, let's create a variable called entryId, which will basically be the ID. So whenever you want to get something by ID, you'll obviously have access to the ID. And that ID, you already know by now that you get access to that ID with the help of the C. So we'll say c.params.byname ID. Object ID from hex. And when I save this, hopefully it should get for me the primitive package. Let's see. Yeah, so it was able to get all these packages for me that I needed here. So I realized the issue was that I was having these double quotes here, and that's why the extensions were not working. They were not getting all the packages that I needed. But now they were able to get all the packages that I need. And then why doesn't it get the HTTP package for me? I don't know. Anyhow, let's handle that later. So the primitive package is part of Mongo driver, bson, helps us to work with IDs, right? So that ID, when we have to use with our MongoDB, you need it in a particular format, and we'll have context and cancel, context.timeout, context.background, and 100 seconds. Now the entry that we'll fetch, we're defining that. This is what we'll be returning from this function, by the way. So we're defining that as bson.m, and we'll use the standard MongoDB function called find1 to use that ID to find for us. So with bson, for getting all, if you remember, we passed an empty object here with bson.m. Here we are passing the actual ID. So we'll say bson.m and pass the actual ID. For the ID, you have doc ID, which we just got using params, and we want to decode it into an entry, into this variable called entry. And here we'll have to specify the collection on which we want to run this program, this function, sorry. And we'll handle the error here itself. Error is not equal to nil. C.json HTTP dot status internal server error. Why is it not auto completing? I don't know. Yeah. So this auto completion is brought to us by tab 9. So if you want to install it, check it out. It does help, but then it also makes you dependent on it. Because I've realized that I start expecting it to autocomplete some things, and I'm scared. I'm scared that I might even forget some of the syntax, and it'll be a problem, because even now I have to switch between so many documentations to actually check all these functions right now. Like the HTTP function, I always have to keep the documentation open. For the MongoDB package, I have to keep the documentation open. So I'm scared that even the basic things I might forget if I start relying too much on tab 9. So just be careful of that, guys. If you're appearing for interviews, you don't want this to happen to you, trust me. And if everything goes well, you want to say http.status okay, and returning entry. So that is it. We have 4 functions remaining. So we have add entry and get entries by ingredient, upgrade ingredient, and update entry. And it looks very challenging to be able to do all these 4 in just one video, because we still have these errors remaining. So maybe I'll do these functions right now and handle errors with the front end. Anyhow, let's get started. At least let's not waste time. So we'll start working with the add entry function. So I'll say context cancel, and then I'll create my context with my timeout with 100 seconds. I'll take a variable called entry. I'll access my modals being what I've just created here. So the way you access a model struct in another package is by writing the name of the package and then writing the name of the model. So in case you want to check it out, our struct was called entry with a capital E, and this is what I'm referencing here. When I try to save it, hopefully it should get that package for me. Yeah, so it was able to get Go, React, Calorie, Tracker, IT models, which is exactly what I want. Okay. So you want to use the bind JSON, the very common bind JSON function. And why you use it is because you get some data in the request body, which will be the data for the entry, but that will be JSON data, and you want that JSON data to be converted into something that Golang understands, which is based on this struct. And you want you've already told Golang that, hey, with JSON this is what it's going to look like, and you need to convert it into this so that we can work with this. And that's exactly what we're doing with binding JSON. So you can say here if error equals to, and you can handle the error here itself. So here is not equal to nil, and we'll say c.json, and we'll print out the error. Okay. So thankfully today tab 9 is saving a lot of time for us. And now that we've done this, we want to add one more thing to this object. We want to add an ID to this object. So we'll use primitive package and the new object ID function for that. And we'll get a new ID for this new entry that we're creating. And we'll simply use the entry collection. And we'll use the standard function that you get, the insert one function for MongoDB. If you worked with MongoDB, you already know this. We're just going to insert the entry. But I have missed one thing. I will validate the struct called entry, and I will check if there's a validation error or not. And this validation error, I'll handle it. So I'll say if validation error not equal to nil, I want to print out this only basically, but instead of error, I'll print out validation error. And we'll print it out as well. So we'll print out the validation error. And you want to return. Now this validate package, also I'm expecting Golang to be able to pick it up properly. Was it able to? No, it wasn't able to. Basically I want to be using the validator v10. Anyhow, let's think about that in a bit. Okay, so coming back here, after validating it, we'll create our entry ID and then we'll insert one. And here, whatever gets inserted, we'll get a result from there, or we might get an insert error. And we want to handle that insert error. So we'll say if insert error not equal to nil. Firstly, we obviously want to copy and paste this part. And for the error, we'll just output a message, and message is something that we'll create here. So it's a message fmd.printf order item was not created. And then you want to say fmd.println insert error. Cool. Return. Defer cancel. And if everything went well, you want to say status okay. And you want to return the result, which was this. It came from inserting into the database. All right, so add entry is done. Now let's worry about our get entries. Actually, let's worry about update entry, and then let's handle the other two. So in the update entry, you will say entry ID, so the params dot by name and ID. Doc ID will be equal to, we'll use our primitive package again, and entry ID. And I will create my context timeout. So I'll just copy and paste that same thing here. And then I will create a entry with models dot entry. I'll do the same thing. I'll just bind with JSON. So I need that from here. Copy and paste this whole thing here. Okay. And then we'll also validate, because we're getting data. When you're updating something, you're sending the entire data, the new data for that, for that data point that exists in the database. And this is why you have to kind of follow the same structure in the function that you would for a post or a create function. So here you'll say entry collection dot replace one, and whatever comes from here, you'll capture that in a variable called result. And there could be this error also, this error. So we'll handle that error right now. So we'll say error not equal to nil. Say c.json. Print out the error. Like send the error in response, and then also print out it in the terminal and return. So you defer cancel, and if everything went well, you want to say c.json http.status okay, and you want to return result.modified count. Result being what you got back from replace one function, and this is what we want to work on now. So our replace one function has context, has so this is why I hate these extensions. They try to autocomplete something else, which I clearly not want to type. So for replacing something, you obviously want to send the ID of that, and then you want to send the data. So you want to send the ID along with the new data that you want to get replaced in the database. So we'll say pson.m again. Again, this is troubling me. So we have, according to our model, we have to send dish, fat, ingredients, and calories. That's what we'll do. So we'll say dish, fat, ingredients, and calories. For dish, it's called entry.dish. Fat, it's called entry.fat. For ingredients, it's called entry.ingredients. Calories, it's called entry.calories. And here you'll put a comma. So this was your update entry function. Now, I think two functions are remaining: update ingredient and get entries by ingredient. But update ingredient should be very similar to what we just did, because we're just updating the ingredient of that particular entry, ingredients. Okay. So here again we'll do this part is common, and instead of entry we'll just have to create ingredient. But after that also some parts will be common, so I'll just copy and paste them for now. Instead of entry we'll use ingredient, and ingredient will basically start off from this. So we'll say ingredient is a struct which basically has ingredients, using a star here because this is what we're going to send, so we have to refer it. And in JSON it's going to look like this. So in this function, when you're calling this function, this route which leads to this function, sending the ingredients which are going to look like this in JSON, but we want Golang to understand this. It's all part of the ingredient struct. And when we create a variable for us to use called ingredient, we want to say that it's of type ingredient struct. And this is how we were able to also bind JSON. Now simply you want to use entry collection and the update one function to pass the context and the ID of the data point to edit or update, and we'll say it's equal to doc ID that we just worked on out here. What you might get back will be result, error, and along with this, don't close this round bracket yet. Along with this, you have to also pass the data, because along with the ID, you want to pass the data that you want to update it with. So that will be $set ingredients will be equal to ingredient dot ingredients. When we say ingredient, ingredients derive of struct ingredient which has ingredient. So when we say ingredient dot ingredients, this is what you're referring to, the ingredients that this function just received from the body. This is what you're referring to here, and ingredients here is the actual value in the database of the column which is ingredients. So this will become equal to ingredient.ingredients, which we are sending right now. $set is a standard operator that you get in the update one function with MongoDB. All right. After this, you will handle the error. This error you'll handle here. So you'll say if error is not equal to nil, you want to say c.json and return the error, print the error, and then return from the function itself. Defer, cancel. And we'll also return, we'll actually return just the modified count. So instead of returning the result, return the modified count. Whew. So that was our update ingredient function. And now we'll work with the get entries by ingredient. So let's move on to the next function. We'll take care of all these red lines in a while, don't worry. Let's move on to the next function, which is also the last function, get entries by ingredient. So here what we will do is we'll say ingredient will be equal to params by name ID, and because we want to get it by the ingredient ID, and then we'll create our background context. To get the entries, we'll create a variable called entries. This is what we'll be returning from this function at the end. So we can write that from this function at the end we'll return entries, and in between is where the magic will happen. So we'll say entry collection dot find cdx comma bson dot m, and instead of passing an empty object, like we pass an empty object for getting all the entries, then we pass the ID to get just that one particular entry by ID. And now we will pass the ingredients instead, and that we'll have here an ingredient. And we can capture this in a variable called cursor, and we might get an error out here. So we'll say if error is not equal to nil, c.json internal server error. We'll use the fmt package to print out the error as well after returning it, and we'll return from this function. Now we'll say if error is equal to cursor dot all go over all the entries, and here also we'll print the error again. And both these lines will copy. So we're basically bringing all of those in this entries variable. This is what we want to return. And here we'll say defer, cancel, and print out the entries as well to the terminal, so that we know if there's any issue, we'll be able to catch it here. Okay, so this is it. These are all the functions. We have done all the functions, and in the next video we'll start with the front end, and we'll also fix these issues. I mean, I should have actually kept them over a couple of videos, and I did everything in one video. It's not, I don't think it's recommended. So we're done with the backend. We'll fix these small issues in the next video, or at least we'll start working with the front end, and we'll figure it out. There are a couple of issues, as you can see. There are some things that are in red. But before you start debugging and before you start solving these issues, make sure that you're on the same Golang version that I am on, which is 1.18.4. This is a new setup, so I'm using it on a new PC. There was some issues with my old PC, so now I'm on 1.18.4. Make sure you're on the same as well, because then we can have, you won't find issues then. This code definitely won't work for 1.14 and below, I think, because by default on this PC, when I was setting up this PC, it was on 1.14, it wasn't 1.13, I think 13, it wasn't working properly. So I made sure to switch to the latest version of Go, and now everything, at least I know will work fine. All right, so the issues that I see here, first is that there was a validate function package that we had imported here, which was the this package, right? And that's the one that's giving us these issues, and that's because we had to initialize. I forgot to initialize the validate variable validator.new, right? So you can't directly use this validator. You have to call the new function, and then you have to assign it to a validate variable, and then you'll be able to use it, and then all the squiggly lines, they go away. Now the other issues are that here in a couple of places I have not completed this. It should have been internal server error. The other issue that you can see is with c.json, and that's the reason why there's so many issues with this file, and that's only because there's this dot here at the end, and once you remove that, all the issues go away. The file is not read anymore, and everything looks all right. It's good to go. It's not read anymore. Okay, and now what we'll do is we'll try running this in the in the terminal and see if the program starts up. So I'm now in my terminal, and here we'll say go run main.go, and it all seems to be working fine. Okay, like we have all the routes running, and the server is running on 8000. Now please note that this is a new setup, so I have not installed MongoDB yet in this, but it will work. So I know it will work. So I'll on my own time I'll install MongoDB and everything. But what you need to check is if the server is running or not, and all these commands show up or not, right? MongoDB is not important right now, because when we build our front end and when we test the backend with our front end, that's when to store that data we'll require MongoDB, and by then I will have installed it and fixed it, like set it up. But you need to ensure that the server is running at 8000, right? Our backend code, and that now resides in this folder called as server. And at this base root directory level, we also want to create a new folder for our front end. So the folder will be called as front end. Instead of doing it ourselves, what we'll do is we will instead open up our terminal, and you can see I'm in the folder, the React Calorie tracker folder. And here, if you ls, I've done ls here, there's only this folder called server, which has all the backend code for Golang. And now I want to create a front-end project here. So I'll say npx. So we're using CRA, standard stuff, create React app, and it's going to be called front end. So I'll create a new folder here, front end. Obviously I want to install, and it'll take a while, so we'll come back. So now when you it's completed, so if you ls, you'll see a new folder called front end, and we'll ls and cd into it. So here you can see it's completed a complete React project for you. And here in your VS Code, you can see the new folder called Frontend as well, where you have all these files. And now is the time that we'll start actually writing the front-end code. What you want to do now is you want to install Bootstrap, and you then want to install React Bootstrap. And once we've done that, hopefully we should see that, in our package.log.json file, should see Bootstrap and React Bootstrap. Make sure these two are there before you start. Now you want to open up your code editor, and inside the front-end folder, we have an SRC folder. And this is where we will create a new folder called as components. In the components folder, we'll have two components. So there's a file for entries.components.js. And there will be another file called singleentry.component.js. And in your app.js file, what you want to do is you want to get rid of everything and just have a div here. And out here also you don't need app.css. You don't need the logo. What you need is you want to import React from React. And then you also want to import Bootstrap. So we'll say Bootstrap /css/bootstrap.css. And in my entries component file, I will create a component called entries, and that's the one I want here. So I'll say from /components/entries.components, and here I'm just going to render my entries. That's it. So this is it. This is our app.js file. Now I'm using plugins for my Go code. I'm not using any special plugins for React. This is a new setup. So let me go ahead and check if there are any plugins that I should be using, so that it makes it easier for me to write these kind of tags in HTML and for React. So let me go ahead and find it, and then in just 2 minutes I'll be back. So I have gone ahead and installed this ES7 plus React Redux and React Native snippets. So they have all the extensions for ES7 and React. So I think this is good. And then I already have Prettier and ESLint. So so hopefully this should show us if there's any problems, or should help us write code much easily. So you can go ahead and do that as well. So now I'll start getting these quick lines, because obviously there's no we don't have these components yet. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and go to our components, entries.component file, and here we will say import React, comma, I need use state and use effect. We'll be using functional components, that's why we need these from React. And I'll also need Axios from Axios, and I don't think we have imported it yet, so we'll have to import Axios. Let me go check it out. Do I already have Axios somewhere? No, I don't have Axios, so we'll have to import install Axios as well. And then we have I need the button, form, container, just the usual stuff. So like I said, we won't be doing anything fancy in front end. It's going to be very standard stuff from Bootstrap, React Bootstrap. And then we need the single entry. So we'll have a component called entry out here in this file, single entry component. So we'll be needing that. So we'll say entry from single entry component. So that's it. We just have these two. files. And for this file to work properly, the multiple entries, we need the single entry component that we have created here. So logically, the best way forward is to create the single component first. So here also, actually, we can simply copy this line from here, paste it here, and here I'll be needing bootstrap as well. So I'll say bootstrap, which I have in app.js file. So I'll actually copy and paste from there. And then I need a couple of things like button, card, row, and column from React Bootstrap. Then we'll create a constant for entry, which will have a few things. It will have the data for the entry, so we'll call it entry data. We'll have set change ingredient. So the struct that we had created in the backend for Golang, all the data for that entry is going to come to us here. And the operations you had seen in the front-end demo, we were able to change the ingredient. We were able to delete an entry. So each row, which will have the data for the ingredient or the calories or the fat, that whole thing is called as an entry. And that's how we've created it in our backend also. And we can change the entire entry as well. Now we'll start rendering it. So for that we need a card and row, bootstrap row, and then we'll have each column. So we'll go column by column. The first column that I have is dish. So in the dish column, the data that I want is and first we'll check if the entry data is not undefined. And the data that I want to print out here is going to be the entry data dot dish. Now I'll just copy and paste this. And in the second column, we have ingredients. And the third column, we have calories. And the fourth column, we'll have fat. And here, all we have to change is these things. So here it'll be ingredients. Here it'll be calories. And here it'll be fat. Apart from that, there are 3 more columns which help you, you can take operations. You can do operations on each row. So those 3 columns. Sorry, I should have. So these 3 columns are buttons. They're going to be buttons. And the button will have an on-click property. And the first button is for deleting the entry. The second button is going to be for changing the ingredients. The third is going to be changing the entry. And now this ties up perfectly well with our changing ingredient, deleting entry, and set changing entry. These are 3 actions we can take here. So we're going to say delete single entry. And here we're going to say set change ingredient. So I'm going to copy and paste so that it's consistent. So you have delete single entry, set change ingredient, and set change entry. Now the data that we want to pass here is entry data dot id. So we want to pass the id of that particular entry, which we'll always have in our entry data already. And here I want to pass nothing because we can change the ingredient of that particular row. And here also I'm passing nothing. So this is our entry. So the way you say an entry, that's the whole component. It's going to have a card, it's going to have multiple rows, and each row you can define what are the columns, and you can define the data that's getting printed in each of those columns. Now these two functions, change ingredient and change entry, we'll have to now define here. So this is actually going to be change ingredient and change entry, and we'll be defining these two functions in this component itself. So we'll say function change ingredient set change ingredient. So we'll have change equal to true, comma id entry data dot id, and later on you want to say function change ingredient. So make sure these C are small, both of these C are small, and so change change entry, because you already have change ingredient, and change entry you'll set the change entry change equal to true, comma you'll pass the id, which will be in entry data.id. Okay, so now we have these two functions being called here, and we're setting the change entry and set change ingredient, and the actual functions which help us, which will call the APIs, will be in this file, the entries components .js file. That's where we'll have the actual functions for calling the APIs, on the local host. We're going to be working on our entries components, and in this file we'll be leveraging our single entry component that we had created in the previous video. So we want to basically print out the multiple entries for calorie tracking that we have done, and we also want to have operations around adding new entries, the ability to add new entries, ability to change ingredients, change any entry, and so on. So we want to have that ability. There's the main thing that we're returning from this file, the main thing in this file is going to be the entries component. And in this entries components, we'll have to define a couple of constants, but for now, I will just show you what we're going to return from this function. So we'll have a div. In that div, we'll have multiple containers, but in today's video, we're just working on 2 containers. And the first container has a button. The second container has entries. So we'll work with entries there. So the first container, which has the button is going to have some text, right? It's going to have an on-click property, and it's going to have some text. The text is track today's. So this is that button you see on top, which you saw on the demo on the top left, which says track today's calories. This is the starting point for everything in our program. And here on-click, the on-click property is going to have set add new entry. Set that true for now. It'll obviously say that this is not defined yet, and we'll change that in a minute, don't worry. Here with the entries, what you want to do is you want to first check if they're null, not null, and if everything seems okay, you want to map them out like this. In the sense, you need access to the entry, every single entry, and access to I, which is the iterator. You want to create one more bracket here, one more bracket here, because you want all the things inside this to have access to the entry, right? You want that. And here is where we'll be leveraging that, the entry component, which is going to help us to render every single entry with all the values. Create one more pair of brackets, and here you will put the entry component that I've been talking about. And I will actually choose this. Okay, so here you'll have access to entry data is equal to entry, and you'll have multiple things here. So you'll have firstly, you just want to show the entry, and then you'll have multiple things like the ability to delete an entry, the ability to update the ingredients, the ability to update the entry itself. So here we'll say delete single entry. Now there will be functions obviously to call the API using Axios, and I'll show you 2 such functions in today's video itself. So we'll have change. I'll close this so that this becomes bigger. Ingredient is equal to set change ingredient, and set change entry to set change entry. Perfect. Now that we have that out of the way, what we want to do is we want to create functions. Firstly, I think we'll have to put a semicolon here, and we want to create functions to help us with the calling the APIs. So let me create those functions. The first function that we'll work on is the add single entry, which is creating a new entry. So I'll say function add single entry. I was just wondering which function to show you guys first. So add single entry looks like the simplest function. So here we'll say set add new entry, false, and here is where you define your API that you'll be hitting. So in our case, it's on 8000 that our Golang server is running. So we want to hit that API. The way we have created the routes are entry/create, and I'm going to use the Axios.post method to help me call the URL and send some data. The data that I'm going to be sending, if you remember the struct that we have created in our Golang, it needs 4 things, right? Ingredients, dish, calories, fat. So I'm going to have new entry dot ingredients. I'm going to have dish, which will be new entry dot dish. I'm going to have calories, which will be new entry dot calories. Then I'll have some fat dot fat, but I'll have to use parse float here, so I'll say parse float. All right. Now you'll get some response, and then you want to handle that, so you'll say getting the response. If response dot status is 200, that means if everything went all right, you want to set refresh data. Now refresh data is something that I'll show you in the next video. We'll create it somewhere here. So this was your adding a single entry. How would you add a single entry? So now the second function that we can create now, since we have time, is the delete single entry. So I'll say function delete single entry, which takes in the ID and takes in a URL. It's on localhost 8000 entry. Sorry, it's slash entry slash delete and plus the ID. So you want to, whenever you want to delete something, you want to send the ID of that item you want to delete. Axios.delete. And you want to handle the response. So let's say and response.
if the response dot status is 200, then you want to set refresh data, and that's about it actually. So you don't want to, sorry, by mistake I've closed the bracket here, which you don't want to, and I'll check if I have not done the same yet. No, here everything is okay.
Our agenda is quite clear. We'll create all the constants that we require in this file to work with, so that at least some of the squiggly lines will go away. And we need the code which runs on initial load up, and the code that runs every time the page refreshes. So let's get started. The first thing are entries and set entries, and that's for that I'll be using use state. And then I have so I'll starting it off as an empty state. And for refresh data, so set refresh data and refresh data, I'll be using again use state, but I will set to false in the beginning. Then we have change entry comma set change entry, use state, change will be false and ID is 0. Then we have change ingredient, set change ingredient. So these will help us to work with the changing of the entry when we want to update the entire entry. This will help us when we want to change just the ingredient in each entry. So you'll say use state, change is false, ID is 0. This needs to be encapsulated in these curly braces. Then we'll have a constant for new ingredient name and set new ingredient name is equal to use state, set as empty. And then comes the most important one, which we just used in the last video, which was the adding new entry, and set add new entry. Then we have a new entry, set new entry. For that we'll start with dish, which is empty, ingredients, which is empty, and calories 0, and fat 0, and all of this will be encapsulated in these curly braces since it's an object. So these are all the constants that we'd use. As you can see, a lot of these squiggly lines, they have kind of gone away. Now let's write some code for the initial load up. So we'll say use effect, and initial load up, you get all the entries. Now we have not created the get all entries function. We will do that. Then for refreshing, we have refresh it as false by default. But if it's true, then you want to set refresh data to false, and you want to get all entries. If you don't set it to false, then you won't be able to refresh it again, right? So if it's false and then becomes you make it true, you can check here and then always get all the new entries. Now we have called get all entries twice, and I think so right now is the right time to build the get all entries function. So we'll come here and we'll say function get all entries. Again, we'll give the URL. So I'll say var URL is equal to http localhost 8000 / entries, and you use axios.get URL comma response type will be JSON, then response. The response that you get, we'll check if there's, just like we did earlier, we'll check if the response dot status is equal to 200, and we'll set entries, and that's it. That's our function. We'll be working on the pop-up that comes up when you want to add a new entry. So we already have the function to adding a new entry, which is the add single entry function. We don't have the pop-up which helps us to add this new entry. Now, one thing that I've noticed is that what I've not done is all of these should actually be inside the entries component. So just make sure you place them there. And now is the time to start working with the pop-up. So for the pop-up, come here to your container where we created these two containers. And here is where we'll create the modal. We'll be using a modal for creating the pop-up. For modal, we'll say show is equal to add new entry on hide we'll say set add new entry will be false in the beginning, and this will be centered. The modal will be in the center. Now for the modal, you can have different properties. So for the modal, you can have a header, and the header will have a close button on top, and the modal will also have a title. The title will be add calorie entry. So whenever you want to create a new entry, you'll see this pop-up which has a close button, which has the main title as add calorie entry. And apart from the header, it will also have a body, and this is the body has all the complete form where we have to enter the dish name, the ingredients, calorie, and so on. So in the body, you'll say model dot body, and we'll create a form. So for that, we'll use form dot group. Actually, the G should be capital. And we'll create labels. So for form dot label, the first one will be dish, and with the label we'll have a form control where we can have on change new entry entry.dish, we'll set the value of the new entry.dish equal to event.target.value. And similarly, like we have this form label, we'll have multiple mode labels for the ingredients, calories, and so on. So we'll have one for ingredients, one for calories, and one for the fat. So I'll just give them the names accordingly: ingredients and calories, fat. After this label, there will be the form control for this label. So I'll copy and paste this here. Sorry, here, here, and here. And now we'll make changes. So for the ingredients, it should be new entry dot ingredients. For the calories, it should be new entry dot calories, and for the fat, it should be new entry dot fat. After the form group is over, inside the body itself, we need two buttons. The first button is for adding that new entry that you're creating. The second button is for canceling it in case you don't want to add this new entry. Both of these buttons will have an on-click property. The first one will have add single entry, and the second one will have set add new entry. It's set to false. And that's about it for this pop-up. Now what you can do is we can either work on the other two functions that are pending here from the function side, or we can end up creating a new pop-up for changing the ingredient or changing the entry. This was the entire pop-up for adding a new entry. And I was wondering what to take up next, so I think the best way forward is to create the pop-up for changing an ingredient. So I'll do that. It will be modal show equal to change ingredient dot change, and we'll have an onHide property. Set change ingredient change is equal to false, comma ID is 0, and you want it to be centered. Then you'll have model.header, just like we did earlier, and the header will have a close button. Model will also have a title, and the title will have change ingredients. Then after this header, we'll have the modal body. So we'll say modal.body. In the header, you have a header has a close button, header has a title to change ingredients. So this is used when you want to change the ingredient of a particular entry. And in the body, just like we had earlier, we had a complete form. Here also in the body, we'll have form dot group
In the form group, we'll have a form dot label, which will say new ingredients, and that label will have a form control just like we had last time. The form control will have an on change property, and for that event we'll have set new ingredient name, the event dot target dot value. Now you'll also have two buttons. The first button is for change, the other button is for cancel. Just like last time we had a button for adding the entry and the another button for canceling it. Similarly, we'll do that here. So button for cancel. So this button will have an on-click property. We'll say change ingredient for entry the other button, the cancel button, will have an on-click set to change, set change ingredient, and inside you'll have change as false and ID as 0. To cancel it, you make the state back to how it was, where the change was false and ID is 0. So this is it, I think. In the next video, we'll create one more pop-up for changing the complete entry itself. And then we have just two more functions remaining here, and then we're done with the front end. Right, for the ingredients, we have called this function called change ingredient for entry. We have not created that function yet. We will create that function. But what if we want to change the entire entry? For that, we will create a pop-up now, and we'll also be calling a function for changing single entry. And both of these functions then we will build in the next video. So today's video is about building this pop-up quickly from scratch. So we'll have a modal, sorry, it's not a model, it's modal. We'll have a modal for changing the entry. So we'll have change entry dot change, and we'll have an on hide property. To begin with, the change is false and ID is 0. And this whole thing is centered. Now, in this modal has a header. It's going to have a header. So it'll say modal dot header, which will also have a close button, and the header will have the modal title. Title basically has change entry event, in the sense you want to change the entire entry for the like change the entire entry for the calories, the entries that you do with the dish and ingredients and all of that stuff. If you want to change that whole thing, this is the way forward. So we have modal header, and then we'll have a modal dot body. So I'm having this whole red line issue. It's easily fixable because it should be in the div. We want to return that in the div. So in the modal body, you will have form dot group,
And if we're changing the whole entry, that means all of the values will change, right? There's only one squiggly line here. That's because we have not defined this function. Okay, so ignore that for now. Okay, coming back. So this form needs to have all the entries, right? It'll have for dish, ingredients, calories, and so on. So we'll create form.label first. We'll have a dish, and then multiple labels actually. There'll be label for dish. There will be label for ingredients, for calories, and for fat. So I'll go ahead and start changing that quickly. This will be ingredients out here. This will be calories. And then for the fat. Now with the label, there's also going to be the values, which will be in form control. It will have an on change event where you want to say new entry dot dish, initialize the value to event dot target dot value, and you want to copy and paste it for ingredients, and you want to copy and paste it for calories, copy and paste it for fat. And here all you have to do is just go ahead and change these values. So you'll say ingredients, here it'll be calories, and here it will be fat. The only thing that changes here is that the type of this is going to be number. Okay, and you'll have to make that change to the add new entry area as well, because we had not, even for fat earlier, we had not said that it is going to be of type number, whereas it should specifically say that. Otherwise, by mistake, we might end up adding some text here, and Golang at the backend is not expecting text, it's expecting a number, and that'll lead to issues. So you want to have that. And outside this form group, there are going to be two buttons. Button 1. So the button 1, what it does is it has change, and button 2, we know now that it's going to be for canceling. So we'll have cancel. So button 1 will have an on-click property, change single entry. We don't have this function yet, but we'll create it. And this has an on-click set change entry. So we'll put change as false, and we'll put ID as 0. So if you don't want to update this and you just want to cancel it, we want to take it back to the original state, which was this. So we'll set the change entry to the original state. And now the only thing that's left is to create this change ingredient for entry function and the change single entry function. We have just two functions left, and we're done with the front end. So the two functions are change single entry and change ingredient for entry, both update functions. So this one is a little simpler, which is the change single entry one. And what you do here is you say change entry dot change equal to false, and you'll take the URL, which is http localhost 8000 /entry /update plus change entry.id, and you will use the axios.put method to make the update. So you'll say URL comma new entry, and then you'll get the response. In the response, you'll check if response.status is 200. You want to set the refresh data to true. That means it will automatically refresh it for you. So as soon as this is set to true, then our function here checks for refresh data. If it's true, then sets the refresh data to false, and then it gets all the entries for us. Now, as you can see, we have just one squiggly line remaining, and that is for the change ingredient for entry. So we'll create that function change ingredient for entry. Firstly, we'll set the change equal to false back again. Then we'll use the URL for HTTP localhost 8000/ingredient/update. So for the update and delete, just add a slash at the end. Okay. So for the updating of the ingredient here, you'll say change ingredient .id, and then again we'll call the axios.put method on the URL. And here in this case, you're not passing the entire object, you're just passing the ingredient data, which is in your new ingredient name. Once you do that, you'll get the response. For the response, you'll console log the status, and you'll say response.status is 200, set refresh data to true. And it's a good practice to console.log the response status everywhere in all of these places. I've just done it here because this is the function that I think things go wrong with more often, because it's just updating just one value, right? Things can happen there. Okay, so everything looks good. We can try to see if there's any issue. We can do a quick check, and then we will here it's Modal, and then we will try and run our program. Sorry, there's Modal is already there. Okay, then we'll try and run our program, and we'll see what happens. Okay, one quick thing is that at the end we didn't add export entries, and this is why we were getting a small issue here, the small line here. Now it feels okay. Now we can try running our program. I tried running the program, and I can see some errors. Here I know that in the single entry component I have forgot to export default. So we'll say export default entry. So at least that's out of the way. Hopefully, yeah, so now we're getting an issue out here. And here the issue is, I think that I'm using backticks, whereas I should be using the single inverted commas. Everything looks all right to me now, so I will stop this. And I don't know, somehow when you start the React server, it makes the font so small. I don't know why it does that. Now I'm still getting some issues. Okay, so Axios is not there. So what I'll do is I will stop this, and I know that you can't see the font, so let me just close this and get back a new terminal, because somehow when you start React server, it just messes up the terminal font size. So in my folder, I will go ahead and install Axios, and this should hopefully fix it for us. So I'll say npm start. As soon as I do it, you can see that it's made my my browser so small, as in the terminal so small. And now you can see everything, all of that is here. You have new ingredients, change ingredient, cancel, and oh, why is it? This shouldn't be there. I mean, this component shouldn't be there for changing ingredients. Only track calories, today's calories should be there. So we have to now fix that. Okay, so I have found the issue in the code. It's because the modal where we were changing an ingredient, right, which is the one that is showing up in our browser, the one for change ingredients, right, this one, it's showing up by default because this modal is getting ended right here, whereas it should actually end after the body has ended, and only then the new modal starts. So now everything is fine. So if I track today's calories, this whole pop-up shows up. I can create new calories and those entries will show up here. I'll have to start my Golang server. But everything will work perfectly fine. What I will do now for you is I will test this code. I will put it on GitHub, and then you run it and everything will work perfectly just as it did in the demo when we started off this project. And I will now take your leave. I have a long day ahead. I have to start my office work. It's early in the morning. It's about, I think, 6 or 7 right now. I'm not sure. All right. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. And I'll see you in the next video. In the next series. Sorry, this series is over. In the next series, I'll see you.